How's it going, guys? I'm Chris, and this is Regular Guy Training. Today we're going to talk about something that I actually don't see a whole lot of reviews on, mostly because I feel as if a lot of people, don't feel as if it's worth it, I guess, to review it. But let's talk about the Aimpoint Comp M4. Now, the Aimpoint Comp M4 actually has a fairly storied history. It's been in military service for a long time. It replaced the Aimpoint Comp M2, with just some features that were a little bit easier for just everybody involved with it. Right. So it's been around for a long time. It's been in a lot of different armories. What's kind of funny is that I don't really see it a whole lot in use, rather, with the civilian market and that kind of stuff all that often. And it's usually for a couple of reasons. Number one, a lot of times people are considering weight. A lot of times people are considering cost, and things like that. But I've had this guy for about 5 years now. And it took me a while to figure this out, and a lot of this is rather large undershoot and that kind of thing, because I probably forgot a whole lot of stuff over the course of 5 years. But what I can recall, based off of different rifles that I've had this on board, and based off of students that I've had use rifles with this optic on, and we'll talk about that again here in a second. Over the course of 5 years, this thing has probably well over, but I can easily recall, a little over 50,000 rounds. So, and the whole time it's been running on an American Defense mount. So, let's talk about this a little bit, because there's a lot of people that will look at different things like the Aimpoint Comp M5, the Aimpoint T2. They'll look at hollow sun optics and that kind of thing, and a lot of times, it gets overlooked, I personally believe, because we're not looking into the engineering behind particular optics. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that the Aimpoint Comp M5 is a bad optic. That's false. It's an awesome optic. Or the Aimpoint T2, that's an awesome optic too. There's a lot of hollow suns that are really, really impressive. But let's talk about a lot of things that go into the biggest thing, and that's reliability. And there's also a few other little quirks about this optic that keeps it around for me personally, and I'm going to keep it around until it dies, and I have no idea when that's going to be, because it hasn't even missed a step in all of that time. So this is the M4S. The original M4 had the battery terminal up here, and a lot of guys didn't like that it was up here. For some, it was like an observation issue. I personally don't really get that, especially if you're right-handed. It's pretty much out of the way. It's out of your field of view, and if you're keeping both eyes open and superimposing dots onto target areas, I mean, the body itself pretty much disappears, especially when you're moving fast. I mean, obviously, if I'm trying to be super precise and that kind of thing, yeah, sure, it's in my field of view, but the window itself, the dot, and everything else is usually got enough field of view to where it's a non-concern for me. But people approached Aimpoint and told them, hey, bring it down. And a lot of times I see that as sort of a superficial thing until I heard this. Because there were some reports of these, like mostly this knob getting bent because dudes would drop rifles, clack them into stuff, trying to get in and out of vehicles, things like that, or bomb blasts, because it was during that era when that kind of thing was very, very heavy, where knobs would bend or break off. So during extreme impacts and that kind of stuff, so moving it down, the theology behind that was, okay, so the people with the observation gripe will stop, and because of just where it's located, it would get knocked around significantly less, and because it's getting knocked around significantly less, you're going to have fewer of those breaks. Turns out that is the case, because I have seen M4s with like really bent knobs and that kind of stuff where they're just kind of barely hanging on, and I haven't ever really seen that with regular M4s with that bent knob or very barely on. Brightness adjustment knob, just because of the location of the thing. You can see it's drooped a little bit. But on the M4S, I've seen really loose knobs, but I've never seen them bent or trying to break off or whatever, unless they're run over by a truck, which I've seen that before, and it gets run over by a 55,000 pound truck. 57,000 pound truck. That's going to break most things. So there's that, right? And what's kind of funny is that this was in an era where Aimpoint could miniaturize their optics readily, and they did, without, killing battery life and that kind of stuff. But they didn't want to introduce that to the Army because, it's one thing to change a couple of features about a familiar form. It's another thing to change a form entirely, because then they start doubting, the longevity of the optic and that kind of thing. Turns out back then there was a legit concern for that, and the biggest one was, on the Aimpoint T1, you had a fairly large parallax issue. And what that is like if your dot is projected in the center, you put that on a target and that kind of stuff, and then if you move the position of your head, let's say you're in a weird position, you're up underneath a car, or you're tired, sweaty, fucking whatever it is, right? And you can see the dot, but the dot is drifted way over to one side of the glass or whatever. A lot of times you have a lot of optics out there that have significant zero shifts, which is what that amounts to. So your dot is projected on a thing, but you impact someplace else. And with the Aimpoint T1, even though it was very highly lauded as like the next latest greatest thing, and it was super durable, a lot of people seen that video that Larry Vickers did, blowing the thing up and shit like that. But it had a fairly significant parallax issue. With the Comp M4 or the M4S, that's simply not anywhere near the case. Now, there is a parallax issue with these particular optics, and what I've noticed is that around about 100, you have a few inches worth of shift. If you drift the glass to like the far right, or top edge or bottom edge of the glass and that kind of thing, you have a few inches, but it's nowhere near as bad as the old Aimpoint T1, which I have used before, and I ran it till it died. And let's talk about how that thing died, and let's talk about why the Aimpoint Comp M4 in a couple of ways is vastly superior to that particular thing. Now, with the Aimpoint T1 that I had, it died because I would sit there, and I noticed this because I'm doing a little bit of dry fire, and I noticed I would press the trigger and the dot would physically shift in the glass. I'm like, what the shit? So I started doing a little bit of research. And the thing is that when you make those adjustments on the side, the turnstile knob, and it instantly rolls over, there's no disconnect, there's no wiggliness in there. That is connected directly to the electronics package. And the problem is that if you subject that to, and it takes a lot, but if you subject it to tons of recoil, tons of impacts and that kind of stuff, you can start affecting emitters to the point where you have shifts in the dot, flickering, that kind of thing, if you take enough impacts or give it enough vibrations. Right. With the M4 and M4S, a lot of people will notice, compared to other optics out there, that when you go to this little turnstile here, I've heard comments, oh, that feels kind of cheap because it's disconnected before it clicks over. That was actually intentionally done because the Aimpoint Comp M2 was very much like the T1, and flip those because the M2 came before all that shit. When people would start impacting that, you'd have battery flickering issue, or dot flickering issues, or dot shifting issues if you had enough impacts and vibrations transmitted to it and that kind of stuff. With the disconnect between the knob itself and the electronics package actually increasing and decreasing brightness, there's way less transmitted shock when the rifle undergoes tons of vibrations. Although, yeah, your electronics package obviously suffers, air quotes, from that, but it's less so when your adjustment knob is directly connected to that. Same thing for impacts. When the knob itself takes a strike, it's very, very rare that it takes enough of a strike to turn into and click over the electronics package violently. Most of the time it just straight up doesn't. Because I've had Aimpoint Comp M4s that either I served with or this one take a strike, and then you pick it up and there's no brightness shift or anything like that, because it is something that you notice with an adjustment knob that's exposed like that, right? And the funny thing is that as far as, durability, long-term, really splitting hairs durability of the optic, it's actually significantly better than a button type system, because button type systems get jammed up. If they take strikes, it goes straight, directly into the electronics package. And there's a lot of people that are hearing me talk about this and are like, dude, I've never had anywhere close to a problem with that. And yeah, sure, that's true. For the vast majority of people, that doesn't matter. But there are some that it does. right? And there's other things, there's other little quirks about it that really separate it from, previously designed or current designs, because it has a particular focus in mind. So, for instance, you'll notice that the glass is very, very recessed into the tube on both ends. It's very recessed inside the tube itself. That actually does a couple of things for you. Number one, it reduces outside glare and the need to increase brightness more than it is required. Because, unlike a lot of optics that are out there, there is a very, very slight tint in the glass. But of course, they were trying to go for, military contracts and that kind of stuff. So if they had a very heavy blue tint, a lot of Army guys don't like that. A lot of Marines really don't like that. So they loosened up on that filter significantly more. That requires a little more energy, right, to output from that. So there's a couple other things that they wanted to consider. And that was, if you recess the glass a little bit and you put a little bit of shader over the top of that, it cuts down on outside glare, and it does reduce a little bit, not a lot. And we're really splitting hairs here, but a little bit for the need to increase your brightness. Now, if it's a day like this, especially if you have like bleach white surfaces like gravel, or if you're in the desert and everything is just brighter, you are going to have to crank the brightness on the thing. But the number of places in which that you have to go max brightness with a Comp M4 are not as much compared to, and I've noticed this with like Holosun and that kind of stuff, for instance, is that I'm cranked up all the way on brightness often with those guys, and I'm usually like max -1 or 2 most of the time with an Aimpoint Comp M4. So that's one thing. Another reason for the heavy recessing and reinforcing of the glass is straight up impacts. In general, you're protecting the glass, A, and 2. Another thing that they tested it for was like water impacts. Guys jumping out of fucking aircraft and that kind of stuff, smacking into water, and there is a significant amount of pressure that water builds up when it slams into optic glass. So we're here to there, right? So there's that. Another thing that you run into with the larger tubes. Now, yeah, obviously this increases your weight, it increases the overall footprint on the rifle, and most people are not a huge fan of that. For those of you that fuck about with night vision, there is a little bit of an advantage that you do have over a lot of micro-sized dots out there. Now, this includes, obviously, anything with an Aimpoint T2 footprint, and the Comp M5, which is out there too, which is like an Aimpoint T2, but with a different battery source, right? So, because that runs a AAA instead of like a watch battery, like a 2032 or something. What this does, and what the increased size of the tube actually does for you, and I've noticed this myself, is it helps with light transmission, because if I'm doing a pass-through, it helps with light transmission to where I can pick up that fainted dot a little bit easier, a little bit better than something like an Aimpoint T2 type footprint, or like an Aimpoint Comp M5, because I've thrown guns up with those in the past while I got nod dropped and that kind of thing, and it does help just a little bit with light transmission if I'm doing a pass-through. Meaning I've got a PVS 14 or a set 31s or whatever it is that you're using, and you have that dropped and you're trying to put the optic out in front of it on a night vision setting. It is a little bit easier to pick up because you have a little bit better light transmission from here to there. As far as a superimposing method, for instance, you have a PVS 14 dropped over your left eye and you're shouldering on the right eye, and you're just trying to superimpose a red dot on like a low light setting for like white light, but you're superimposing that with your night vision. So you bring it up and you can still see a red dot because you got both eyes open, but you're looking at a target area through the green stuff because PVS 14s, or white phosphorus, which is actually, it's easier with the white phosphorus stuff for some reason. Doing a superimposing method is significantly easier too. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I wouldn't rather use like a Neotech XPS3 with that big, huge television screen. But at the same time, the larger tube, the larger footprint as far as glass is concerned, that does help a little bit with that as well. So it lends itself to a little more flexibility in that regard. Now, as far as toughness, I really can't sit here and and say enough that you guys don't really know as far as dive depth and that kind of stuff with them. You can take this optic down to the Titanic. As far as shock and everything else, this thing isn't even sunbursting, and it's had probably way over 50,000 rounds, but I could easily document take over 50,000 rounds with it. So, I mean, it's fucking, like, what more do you really want, honestly? And if you really, really want a testament to toughness more than anything else, go find an Aimpoint Comp M4, M4S, and some Army fucking, infantry arms room or Marine infantry arms room. Just pick one up that has no black on it anymore because it's had the absolute tar beaten out of the thing. Look through it, power it up, and you'll notice that it works. Okay, it's still easily zeroed, and it just kind of goes from there every time. Now, I have seen soldiers kill a couple of them before, but the couple of problems that I've seen are that the glass was so freaking cratered that the second you brought it up, it was just a haze. That was the one issue that I've noticed, and the other one was that there was probably some sort of terminal issue or whatever, to the point where as I'm sitting here trying to crank the brightness on the dot, it's not even really going anywhere. So to power it up, I'll go to its first brightness setting, and it's on max, and it will stay there and only there, and that's it. So, two problems in all the time that I've fucked about and used M4s and that kind of stuff. That is what it is for me. Now, I'm pretty sure that someone in the comments section will have an experience or something like that before, and there's a whole lot of people that try to invent issues because Aimpoint's expensive. But I've never seen an Aimpoint Comp M4 dead out of the box. I've seen it with other Aimpoints before. Like, I've seen an Aimpoint Pro where a guy took it to class, and, he bought an Aimpoint Comp M4 because it's Aimpoint. Or not Comp M4, Aimpoint Pro because it's Aimpoint. It's going to work, right? So, he sets it up, we go to zero, we go to make the first corrections, and it will not correct at all. Like, at all. Dot's just frozen in space, won't make any corrections. I got behind it, shot it, tried to crank it really hard and shoot another group, no change in shot group at all. So I'm just kind of like, holy shit. So I've seen that before. I've seen Aimpoint T1s just fail to power up. Like, dude pulls it out of the box, doesn't power up. And I had a student show up with an Aimpoint Comp M5, powered up, did great, first shot, flicker, dead. That's it. And these are all very reliable optics, and typically no one disputes the reliability of these optics, but I've seen them dead out of box before, right? Now, I've never seen these straight up dead out of box, whether it's, you're getting a shipment from Aimpoint, to an arms room, and we go to check them, make sure that they all work. I never heard of them getting sent back right away. Or, I bought this one, obviously it works straight out of box. Or other people that I've trained with or that have trained under me before that have bought them, never any issues, straight out of box. I've never heard of that before, right? So, and I've been doing this for over a decade now, like concerted effort, trying really hard, training and all this other stuff. I've never seen them just dead out of box. So, take that with a grain of salt, obviously, but it helps me just kind of like lean in that direction a little more as far as the optic that push come to shove. There may be things that it does worse than other optics for sure. But from my personal observations, I've never seen a more reliable optic as far as just getting the brakes beaten off of it or powering up, staying up, that kind of stuff. Little advantages here and there that help you out. I've never really seen it before to where there was ever some sort of issue. Talking about battery life, everyone knows that Aimpoint battery life is insane. It's been insane since, the Comp M2. Here's what's wild about this one in particular, though. I've never even seen an optic listed at 80,000 hours before. And of course, you just kind of cock an eyebrow because there's a lot of optics out there that are listed for 50,000 hours. And then like a year and a half later, because, you're using it all the time, you're on max brightness a lot because you're out in, time like this where it's fucking 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you see stuff at max brightness a lot. So a year and a half later, you got to change the optic out because it died on you, or it's powering way, way, way down before it, powers down and that kind of stuff. I've had this guy for 5 years, right? And it's been used a lot. It's been put on max setting, on max brightness a lot. It's been used under night vision a lot. And I've had to change the battery one time. Because the battery started leaking stuff out of it. Okay. So when an optic outlasts your marriage, it's pretty good on fucking battery life, okay? So it's one of the few times where I'm just kind of sitting there like, yeah, that's as advertised for sure. And part of the big reason for that, and it's behind the engineering behind a lot of optics that have really good battery lives, is that they'll take a cheap, emitter, right? That is very large, and basically so instead of having to reduce the size of that emitter, they'll just, because if they don't, you'll just have way too much light coming through the optic. They just cone it off to where like 85% of the light that could be transmitted is cut off, because they're literally coning it to the point where the only light that's transmitted is through a little pinprick. So even the emitter is way overbuilt. And that's the case for actually a lot of optics with like 50,000 plus hour ratings and that kind of stuff, right? But this was, Aimpoint figured it out early, because as we all know, Aimpoint's been like the pathfinder on a lot of stuff. So, I mean, Christ, I know it's heavy, I know it's large, I know it's not in vogue anymore, and it looks like a lot of friggin' 3X optics that are out there now. But just over time, I've noticed, it's so easy to get caught up on what's in vogue and what's new to test and everything. But over the course of the amount of time that I've brought in guns, brought in optics, tested things, shot the bejesus out of shit and everything else, I forgot that I've never reviewed this, because it's so goddamn boring that it's an afterthought. It's just a thing that you mount up and it works. And I've also noticed that any time that I'm out, that I am putting together a rifle that is, no shit, it's got to work. I'm not fucking around. This is for heavy use, blah, blah, blah. This guy is typically on the top of the list of considerations, or it just gets mounted. So, and one final thing too, much like a lot of traditional elevation and windage adjustments, okay? One thing that I do see as a plus over, the Aimpoint T2 and Comp M5 is that guy you can still mess with as far as like a screwdriver or a casing or whatever. I noticed that in their other offerings, they're still doing that 2-tit system where they have the cap and it's got a couple of prongs that you stick in there and you adjust. And a lot of times these caps are not retained to the optic body itself. So if you lose one, you're down to one. If you lose both, you're down to that little tool. Now, I know a lot of guys are sitting there like, I've never lost caps and that kind of stuff. Soldiers lose shit. Sorry. So it's just one of those things that makes me feel a little bit better, because it doesn't matter if I lose a cap. If one of these little bikini straps comes off and the cap goes into the ether forever, I can still adjust it with a casing from any of the ammo that I've got hanging around. I've obviously made adjustments with live ammunition before. If you got a spent casing, do that. It's purposely overbuilt, right? Like needlessly tough in some cases, and even with new engineering feats that are presented to us, like the Aimpoint Comp M4 is made out of stronger aluminum itself, right? True. But still, even with all that, I see there are little things here and there that this thing absolutely does help with. There are little tiny quirks that make it a little bit more usable to me personally. Now, that isn't without cons, and there is a con that I have noticed before besides size and weight. And it's if I'm in a very heavy particulate environment like snow, tons of mud, tons of sugar sand, that kind of stuff, the heavy recessed glass can turn itself into a little bit of a problem. Okay, because I have had to get in there with gloves and clear out a little bit of a pathway so I can see before. And that has happened on a couple of occasions. And the couple of occasions that I'm personally talking about is snow. because you're a little less apprehensive to have your rifle take a spill in snow than it is in mud. Usually if I'm in a very, very muddy environment and that kind of stuff, I'm, as you probably should, trying to keep my crap out of, the soup, right? So I've never really had a whole bunch of stuff fling in right at my glass as far as mud goes, but I have had to dig some snow out of there before. So, the disadvantages besides size and weight are that heavy recess, depending on the kind of stuff that you're doing, can turn itself into a problem if you're not paying attention. Is that as much of an issue with the Comp M5? No. Is it older technology? Absolutely. Does it have worse parallax a little bit than the Aimpoint Comp M5? Actually, yeah. The Aimpoint Comp M5, as far as dots that are designed that way, it's, as far as parallax goes, it's the best in the world. The only thing that beats it out is the EOTech, and that's because of the particular type of projection that they use. So, but is it all the way behind, though? Is it so heavy that you're slow? Does it take up so much real estate that you can't mount other crap to your gun? I mean, for me, the answer to that's no. If I'm on like a really, really short 300 black rifle and that kind of stuff, yeah, probably. But is it an optic that I'm probably going to continue to use until the wheels fall off after my children die from old age? Yeah, I'm probably going to keep it around. So, I know this was wordy. I know this took a long time, and I know that there was a lot of talking that I had to do on this, but there is a lot of stuff that goes into it. And a lot of times people sit there and say, yup, that's a Aimpoint Comp M4, it works, but they never really go into why. So, that's it for me. 5 years, 50,000 rounds, and I'm probably missing a whole lot of stuff because over the course of 5 years and not paying all that much attention to how many bullets you fire with this thing mounted, I probably missed all kinds of stuff. But, it is what it is. If you guys want to come out and train with us, you absolutely can. We're getting ready to go to Florida. We're coming back here to Drakesboro, Kentucky before that. I'm getting ready to set up other classes post this. So, if you want to come out and train with us, you absolutely can. If you want to check us out on Facebook, link for both of these are in the description below. Same for my website. My website is, where, the class registrations and all that happen. If you want to support us on Patreon, also link for that is in the description as well. And if you want to get something out of it, out of supporting us, $41 a month gets you to train with us as much as you want to. And for me personally, it's one of those deals where, especially with, ammunition prices are coming down, but they're still kind of high. So instead of paying a retarded amount on top of that, trying to come out and train and, having to get a hotel, take vacation, that kind of stuff, if you're instead paying a gym membership price, it helps out a lot. There's a lot of people that have taken mad advantage of it too, straight up abused it at times. But that's what it's for. It's so that you can come through as often as you need to and develop. So that said, guys, remember, regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy.